We're joined by former NFL defensive back and current broadcaster Solomon Wilcots, who talks to us about the Giants draft, gives us his takes, and he talks about a special initiative he's involved with in his spare time. That's coming up next on the LockedOn Giants podcast, brought to you in part by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, lines, odds than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. Patricia Traina here with you, and as always, folks, thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And I'm really excited to have this next guest with me. We've been doing guests all week, but this gentleman in particular, I'm excited to have on. And this is Solomon Wilcots. You might remember him from his days as a former Bengals player. He is also a longtime NFL broadcaster and analyst, does a great job. He's been on Sirius, I believe the NFL.com website, and he's got a new initiative that he's been working with for the betterment of player health and safety involving ALS, and he's going to talk about that later with us on the program. But first, Solomon, as always, thank you so much for coming on and welcome.
Well, Patricia, thank you, first of all, for having me. It's a pleasure to be on with you, and looking forward to talking about some Giants football and really just spreading the message about fighting this dreaded disease known as ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yeah, it's a serious one, and it's been in the forefront of news, with Steve Gleason and some other players who have, unfortunately contracted it. And we'll talk all about that and some interesting stuff, folks. You will want to stick around throughout the podcast to hear what Solomon has to say. But first, let's jump into the draft. Solomon, I got to get your overall opinion on this draft. Now, this was kind of a weird draft in that no quarterbacks. There really wasn't a big demand for quarterbacks. I think we had one go on day two, or two maybe it was. But have you ever recalled a draft being this weird with quarterbacks not going so high?
And not to mention that, you're right, the quarterbacks, everybody was like, we're not in the quarterback business. They wanted to get veteran quarterbacks more than they wanted some of the rookies, which come a little bit cheaper on the rookie contract, right? And it was only Kenny Pickett from the University of Pittsburgh that went to the Pittsburgh Steelers with the 20th overall pick. He was the only guy at the quarterback position to go in the first round. All the rest had to wait until the third round, which is where we really thought most of them would go. We kind of compared them to Davis Mills in last year's draft. As you remember, the rookie that came out of Stanford playing for the Houston Texans, and 1 year later, he's a starter. And so there is hope for Malik Willis and some of the other guys, Matt Corral, as well as Desmond Ridder. And so there's hope for these guys, even though they're third round picks. Someday they could be a starter in the NFL, providing they continue to grow and develop.
Yeah, stranger things have happened. I mean, some kid by the name of Tom Brady kind of worked out, and he was a day three pick, right? So.
He sure was. A 6th-round pick.
Yeah.
But this draft was just very interesting. A lot of movement, a lot of trades, a lot of teams moving up the board, teams looking to move down. Multiple teams with multiple picks in the first round. And we saw a couple of teams trade away their veteran wide receivers. We know the market has moved for wide receivers. Instead of paying those guys, they rather trade them away. And then you saw one team in the Philadelphia Eagles who've been trying to draft a wide receiver for years. Not only did they trade for a veteran receiver, they immediately signed A.J. Brown to a 4-year, $100 million contract. That's how much they believed in him.
Wow. Don't you wish you had those contracts back in the day? I mean, goodness.
Don't get me started. Don't get me started. Absolutely.
All right, we won't go there. We won't go there. All right, Solomon, I want to ask you about how the top of the first round unfolded, because the Giants had 2 picks, obviously, in the first round, 5 and 7. There was rumors that they might go Charles Cross. There was also rumors that they wanted to get out of number 7. I don't think the top of the first round could have gone any better for the Giants. What were your thoughts when you saw the 2 cornerbacks come off the board, as opposed to, Hutchinson, who did come off the board, but Thibodeau that didn't come off the board until the Giants took him?
Typically, if you're like the Giants, right, if you are a loaded team and you end up with a couple of picks that high, maybe you look to trade down and get more picks because you already have a solid and set roster. But I think even more so because they have a new general manager in Joe Schoen, a new head coach in Brian Daboll. They want their players inserted into their new offense and defensive systems. And you want to be able to build around what we call foundational players. Well, if you're picking twice in the top 10, you're going to get 2 guys that really should be foundational and guys you can build around. So I think it felt perfect for them, because if you were to ask me, what do they want and what do they need? How do you marry the wants with the needs? Let's continue to rebuild and refurbish the offensive line. That's right, to protect the quarterback, Daniel Jones, to really help your runner and Saquon Barkley. And if you can get an exotic, elite pass rusher like Kayvon Thibodeau, then you do it. And you don't trade out of that because you're not going to get them later, Patricia. So you're right. I thought the board fell perfectly in a line, not only with the Giants' needs, but with what they wanted, what they truly wanted to get when you talk about foundational players on your offense and defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, I have to believe, and I was sitting at the Quest that night. I have to believe that they were cheering the way the board was falling. I mean, there was some talk that they might go cornerback, but when Thibodeau was there, I'm sure Joe Schoen was doing backflips up and down Route 3 because he's like, right. Oh my gosh, who thought he was going to fall that far? But, let's talk about Thibodeau if we could for a moment here. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, I've seen comparisons to a young Ray Lewis. I've seen some compare his swagger to Lawrence Taylor, who, was probably the greatest player to, defensive player to ever take the field. No disrespect to anybody else, but he changed the game. I've seen some people say that he's going to be as good as, as a Reggie White. I mean, are they putting too much expectation on this young man? I mean, what do you think we can realistically expect from him based on what we saw in Oregon and his skill set?
There is no doubt if you're comparing him to Reggie White and Lawrence Taylor, way over the top, way premature. Now, he's got the potential to be a very good football player year in, year out. I liken him to the best edge rusher in this year's draft simply because he's the most explosive. He demonstrated the greatest quickness, the greatest get-off of any of the edge rushers in this year's draft class. And I got to tell you, Patricia, that's saying a lot because the ones that were in this draft class, there are a lot of them who are really good, including Aiden Hutchinson, the talented All-American from the University of Michigan. But Kayvon Thibodeau is a unique player because he's big. He's got that long reach and the long arms and length that you want from an edge rusher. More importantly, he's got the speed, the quickness, the get off. And then as he continues to develop and have multiple schemes to get to the quarterback, multiple ways of doing it, not just going around the hump, but the swim up and over, to be able to come underneath, to be able to work with others on the defensive line. He's going to be productive, but he's also, I think, going to be a good player for a long time. And listen, I love his personality. I'm going to tell you right now, the kid is smart. He sees the world in a very positive light. Isn't that great? I mean, how can you knock a football player who's got to throw? He's got to turn on a whole nother switch now when he goes out and play a football game. Sure. And I've already seen him do that, so I don't have any concern about that. But I love players that can come to work and do whether it's the interviews, whether it's practice, or whether it's games, and do it with this air of positivity, with a smile on their face. That's the kind of player that we deem to be a force multiplier that makes everyone else in the locker room glad to be his teammate. So that's a special player that the Giants just drafted in Kayvon Thibodeau.
Yes, and that's something that they've been missing for a while. I think the last time they had that kind of swagger, you'd have to go back to 2011 when they had Antrell Roll maybe on that team. I think that's how far back you've got to go.
I'll go with another guy too, because Antrell Roll is a good one by you. I'll go with a Michael Strahan. I'll go with that personality, with that energy, right? He made coming to work fun. He made it cool to be a New York Giant. I mean, let's be honest. And so it's good to see them have a player like that coming into the locker room. And I think the young players, I think the entire organization is going to enjoy having him on the team.
Yeah, I can't wait to meet him for sure. Now let's talk about the other first-round pick, Evan Neal, offensive tackle. Now, for years, the Giants' offensive line has been like a Rubik's Cube that nobody's been able to solve. Do you think now, given what Shane has done, he signed veterans mostly for the interior. He's going with Andrew Thomas at left tackle. Neal's going to project at right tackle, and they have a couple of young guys that they're going to develop. On paper, and I know we have to see them with the pads on, but on paper, is this line maybe a few steps closer to being solved?
Yeah, look, John Feliciano and Mark Glowinski are two of the guys they signed that you mentioned, the interior guys in free agency. And Brian Daboll knows them very well. So does Joe Shane. I think that gives you a chance to get better on the offensive line sooner rather than later. When you bring in the rookies, you kind of have to, they're going to go through some growing pains. And we've seen Andrew Thomas at the left tackle position go through some of those growing pains. Evan Neal, while he played left tackle during his final season at Alabama, early in his career, he played right tackle. In fact, he's played both right and left tackle. He's more of a natural right tackle. So once he goes back to that right tackle position, I think he's a plug and play player right now. I mean, that's what you hope when you take a guy in the top 10, but he fits not only the need, but as I said, the want. And I think he checks all the boxes because he's tough. He's physical. He's almost like the opposite of Kayvon Thibodeau. This guy's very serious, very down to business. That's what you want on your offensive line now. Guy who's got a mean streak about him, and I think he's going to give the Giants some of the toughness they've been looking for up front on that offensive line. And if this offensive line and all those names that we just gave you, Patricia, if they come together to create a really good front in front of Daniel Jones and in front of Saquon Barkley, now we can finally see their talents unleashed. It's been a problem over the last few years. As an offensive player, you only can do so much. I always say touchdowns follow good blocking, not the other way around. And if you don't have good blocking, the touchdowns are going to be hard to come by.
Sure. And then the Giants proved that last year. I mean, the offensive line was like I hate to say it, but they were like a turnstile. And Daniel Jones, we still don't know what we have in him, here at the Giants. They finally have what they think is going to be a solid system that complements him. Mm-hmm. And hopefully, knock on wood, they'll have healthy receivers and running backs and tight ends, something that they didn't really have last year. Right. We'll come back to Daniel Jones in a minute, but I have to ask you about day 2 of the Giants draft, and in particular, the one guy that had a lot of Giant fans going, what are they doing? And that is the receiver from Kentucky, Wan'Dale Robinson. Now, to me, I think Wan'Dale Robinson is a scheme-specific player. He has a specific skill set that fits within a certain niche within a scheme. What do you see when you look at him on tape? What can he do? What can he bring to the offense? Maybe give us a little hint as to what maybe Daboll's going to run from his days at Buffalo.
Well, Brian Daboll, what he wants to do, he wants to attack down the field vertically. Okay, he wants to get receivers down the field vertically. And even as they continue to be consistent in pushing the ball down the field, what he'll do is lift coverage after striking down the field. And they like to bring crossers across the field to those vacated areas and then get the ball to receiver like Wan'Dale Robinson and allow him to create yards after the catch. So if you can catch it and run with it, you fit in Brian Daboll's offense. If you can get beyond the secondary and catch the ball as a vertical pass receiver you're going to fit in Brian Daboll's offense. It's very multiple in terms of the guys that he wants. And I liken, just go back and look at a young receiver like Gabriel Davis for the Buffalo Bills. In year 2, you saw him in the playoff game, the divisional round game against the Kansas City Chiefs, 4 touchdown receptions. He was good as a rookie, got better in his second year. And so you're going to see receivers be able to produce early. This isn't a system that you got to be in for a long time in order to be productive. I think we saw that with many players who have played in Brian Daboll's offense.
It's going to be explosive for sure. And he's also a guy who could probably take some snaps from the backfield, much like Kadarius Toney can. They call him, the human joystick. Yeah. But I call him, it's versatility. It's basically what it is.
Wow. Listen, if they can get Kadarius Toney the ball, whether it's in the jet sweep, whether it is in the screen game, the bubble screen game to the outside, and allow him to what we call create yards after the catch, the offense is going to explode. The offense will open up. I just think a healthy Saquon Barkley is going to be enough for defenses to deal with, that if the offensive line is right, and I think it will be, I think this offense is going to have an opportunity to be a stark contrast to what we saw the last couple of years. I mean, night and day, Patricia. I think there's going to be huge improvement.
Oh, I certainly hope so. Now, before I move off the draft, and then I want to ask you a little bit about Daniel Jones and some of the veterans on the Giants, before we get to your initiative, folks, stay tuned for that. You won't want to miss that. When you look at the rest of the Giants draft, again, a lot of people are like lukewarm on it. I think there's some value in there, but I want to get your opinion. Who are some of those day 2, day 3 picks that you think are maybe flying under the radar right now, but who could potentially be names that will start catching attention?
I really do believe, and I work with Bill Polian on our the opening drive on SiriusXM NFL Radio. He talks about 80% of the players who are starting in the National Football League, who turn out to be the really productive players, they come in the first 3 rounds. He said, you can get some players who are undrafted that might pop for you, or some other guys, they end up being the backups. They're going to fill in your special teams. But really, it is at the top of the draft. Those are going to be the guys that are going to win the games for you. They're going to be the guys that have to carry the workload. But I thought they did a good job in the 3rd round. Joshua, I hope I'm saying his name right. It's the offensive guard out of University Azudu, out of University of North Carolina. Big guy who can anchor and really good at the run game when it comes to getting movement up front. If you go back to not to the 2021 season, but go back to 2020, the offensive line for the North Carolina Tar Heels, they have 2 running backs. One, you might know Michael Carter, the running back with the Jets, but also Javonte Williams, who's playing with the Denver Broncos. This offense at times were unstoppable when they had those 2 runners. And they had Elijah Moore, who, Elijah Moore was down at Ole Miss. But I really was just trying to really point to the fact that it was an offense that could run the ball. And this offensive line, I think, is going to be made better by a 3rd round pick that nobody really expect to do much.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he's going to be a starter. I think he'll be in the mix for starter.
Absolutely.
But like you said, they basically, their cupboard was bare at the offensive line spot. They had no young talent. They've added a few guys now that they can develop just to keep that, churning that offensive line over and over, because most of their guys are signed to 1-year deals. They're not all going to be re-signed at the end of the year. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, BetOnline.net is the only place that offers the best information on the latest odds, contests, and player props for all your sports betting needs. No matter what sport you're into, BetOnline.net has you covered. Plus, they offer everything you need to know for live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head on over to BetOnline.net today to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Solomon, I want to talk a little bit about some of the veterans on the Giants team. Specifically, let's start with Daniel Jones. Now, big year for him. The Giants decided not to pick up his option year, which was not a surprise. Financially, it made a whole lot of sense not to do it. But, a lot of people, they say, oh, Daniel didn't have the offensive line. He didn't have the consistency. He didn't have this. He didn't have that. It just sounds like a lot of excuses. And I'm not saying that those aren't valid excuses, but how much of his struggles or slowness in his development are on him? What can he do better outside of, the scheme and the talent around him? What can he do better?
Yeah, I think the Giants would even admit that if you were to ask the question, has Daniel Jones failed the New York Giants or have the Giants failed Daniel Jones? I think even in the front office, they would say they failed the player. I mean, now, I think you asked a really valid question. To what extent has he failed the team? And that is the inability to protect the football, because he's had multiple coordinators, multiple play callers in his ear. It's an offense that really has lacked imagination, hasn't really used the talent brought in Kenny Galladay. We already talked about Kadarius Toney. I mean, there's no real attempt to integrate these really good players into an offensive system that allowed Daniel Jones to be effective and efficient, right? So we know the systems and even the coaching staff, I think to a certain degree, let the young quarterback down, because young quarterbacks need coaches that are going to put them in a good system and put players around them and then teach them how to operate within it. I don't think he had any of those things consistently. But I think what he could do better, just getting off the bus, ball protection, ball carriage. You don't hold the ball here. You don't hold it low. You don't hold it up high. You got to hold it right here in the sternum. So if they come from the blind side, you still have it close to the chest and you have it high, what we call high and tight. If they hit you coming from, you have to have both hands on the ball. You can't hold it loose and away from the body in one hand. I can tell you that. And so we saw him doing these things, and I'm like, these are things that he should have been taught at the college level for sure. But even if the coach didn't harp on it, you come into this league, those are the things that you got to know. And if you're going to be effective at holding on to the ball, and quarterbacks have to, number one thing is ball security. Got to be able to protect the ball. You cannot be a turnover machine, because it's going to be hard to win ball games if you are. And so in that sense, he's played a role in his own, sort of regression as a young quarterback. I like him. I think he's displayed some toughness. I think he has, you'll like this, he's got that personality like an Eli Manning, where I think you and I know it could be tough to be a quarterback in New York, right? You're going to hear it. But I think he has some of that Eli Manning quotient where it just rolls off his back. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem to impact him emotionally and affect him in a negative. He's got a great sense of who he is. He doesn't need to control the room. The guy's got enough athleticism about him where I think he can be a special player, but I think it does start with protecting the football. But I think Brian Daboll is what he needed. He needs a coach that comes with a very unique offensive plan that allows him to do a lot of different things. It's multiple. And I think Daniel Jones has the physical talent. He's got the mental makeup and the temperament to, I think, be a good quarterback in the NFL. It's just that now it's got to happen this year, right? If it's going to happen in New York with the Giants, it's got to happen in 2022.
And a lot of people already writing him off, I might add. But let me ask you about one thing that kind of always bugged me about him that I think is purely on him. A lot of times his decision-making, it's like he's throwing the ball into windows that don't exist. He's holding on to the ball maybe a little too long, doing the old burping the baby, if you know what I mean. I'm sure you do.
He's just patting the baby. Yeah, got it. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like almost like there's the clock in his head is not. It's off, I guess is what I'm saying. Now I don't know if that's because the offensive line, he thinks, oh my God, I'm going to get hit. I don't know if it's because the receivers are not running the right routes, or I can't put my finger on it, but I do see, when I watch him, some throws, you sit there and you go, dude, what were you thinking? Do you see that as well?
There's no doubt you see some slow processing, but not all the time. There are times when I see the ball come out accurately, on time, and really good, in a good phase. I think it's a byproduct of, one, he needs to continue to be drilled on increasing his clock. He also has to be given a playbook that allow him to build this rhythm that gets the ball out quickly. I thought a lot of time listen, they go 7-step drop. He's meant to hold onto the ball. You and I both know at times the receivers have failed him. I can remember many times him hitting Evan Ingram, and Evan he's not on the same page. I mean, I could go with some other names as well. So it just seems like this is an offense, and it was a system, and the entire operation was misaligned. That impacts the quarterback more than it does anyone else. And so now I think we can more rightly judge. You know, he's going into his 4th season. He started a lot of games early in his career. I mean, here's a guy that should have enough experience now going into year number 4, where we ought to be able to see greater consistency, right? And we ought to see him clean up some of these calamities that you and I have been talking about, whether it's not carrying the ball properly to protect it, not turn it over, or just getting the ball out and not burping the baby, so to speak, not sitting there just patting the ball longer than he should.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. Maybe with a better offensive line, and, you know, they got to get Barkley involved. I mean, the fact that how many offensive coordinators haven't been able to figure out how to get this guy into space more often. You know, getting Kadarius Toney the best out of him. And goodness, if I had told you Kenny Golladay would have no touchdown receptions last year, would you have believed me?
That's just listen, that's bad on everybody.
Yeah.
That's bad on everybody. Listen, you know, you go out, even if the GM signed a player you don't want. We know what Kenny Golladay can do. Because we saw him do it in Detroit, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
The guy's a big play waiting to happen. And I didn't even see him push the ball down the field doing once. I mean, it was as if, I don't know, coaching staff was trying to send a message to the GM, we don't want him or something. But you gotta use the players. You only get a limited few to have at your disposal during a given season. Better use the one you got. But Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney, there was not even an attempt, at least in my mind, in my opinion, to use those players the way that they should have been used.
I absolutely agree with you, and it was very frustrating, to say the least.
Yeah.
Now, before we get to Clene, which is your initiative you're involved with, I just want to get your take real quick on the defense. Don Martindale, Wink Martindale, whatever you want to call him, comes with a very aggressive reputation. You know, a guy who's going to throw everything at you, including the kitchen sink. When you look at, you know, what he has done in the past in Baltimore, you look at the Giants' defensive talent they've added, and they did put an emphasis on the defense in the draft. I think they had, of their 11 players, 6 were defensive players. The returning guys like Ojulari, McKinney, Blake Martinez is coming back. I mean, what do you see with that defense, and what do you think we might expect beyond, you know, the aggressiveness? Is it going to be exotic? Is it going to be straightforward? I mean, what do you anticipate with Wink?
Yeah, well, Don Martindale now, he hadn't seen a quarterback yet that he doesn't want to blitz. Okay.
And that's dangerous too, if you don't have coverage guys.
Well, that's what happened in Baltimore. I got to see him a lot. Now, it works when you have the corners, right? Mm-hmm. Remember, he had a Marcus Peters, high yield on the intercept list, a guy who can play man-to-man coverage. Marlon Humphreys, right? Talented corners. But then when he lost those guys, then that's when it all started to fall apart. So it's really about these amoeba packages where you're having guys stand around at the line of scrimmage. You don't know who's got their hand down. You don't know who's up. You don't know who's coming. Makes it hard for offensive linemen to count. I love what he does defensively. I love the way that he confuses offensive lines. And by the time they figure it out, it's too late because everybody's quick, fast, hitting, getting upfield. And it's going to be great to have a player like Kayvon Thibodeau within this offense operating in that system. But you and I both know this is a team that's up against the cap. We don't know if James Bradbury is going to even be back. I guarantee you, Wink Martindale is in there every day. Can I at least have James Bradbury? Come on, Joe Shane. But no, it looks like it's like James Bradbury is going to be on his way out, who I think is a really talented corner and would fit good in this system. So tell me while you're blitzing the quarterback and sending everybody at him, who's covering on the back end? Because that was the same problem that Don Martindale had in Baltimore with the Ravens last year. It was so bad that in the first game against the Bengals, Joe Burrow carved him up for well over 350 yards. And then you would think he would develop maybe a more milder approach considering he was without both of his starting corners. No, he even forecasted. No, I'm coming after the second-year quarterback in Joe Burrow. Well, Joe had over 400 yards. It went from bad to worse. And then that's when John Harbaugh allowed you guys to hire Don Martindale as your defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I think as we record this, James Bradberry is still on the roster, but
Yes,
I
he
do
is.
think he's on the way out.
Yeah.
Unfortunate because, it's just he's a victim of the mismanagement of the salary
Yes.
cap,
Yes.
which, it was just a disaster what they were doing. I saw last year as this was coming together, I said, why are they doing this? If they get injuries, if they don't make the playoffs, this whole thing's going to blow up in their face. And now Joe Shane has had to make some very difficult decisions. You wouldn't cut a James Bradberry
No.
ordinarily. You
No,
wouldn't
you
even
wouldn't.
think of getting rid of him.
No.
But here we are.
And I know they might be trying to get a trade. I think they've tried to get him to take a pay cut. He's smart enough to know his value. He's not going to take the
Sure.
pay cut. I think he's due at $13.6 million
Something
for the
like that.
upcoming season. But he has a cap figure of like $21 million, right? Because they did a restructure
He did
last
a
year.
restructure, exactly.
And so now that cap number is very high. He's a talented player.
Sure.
I could tell you, as soon as they release him,
Somebody will kick him out.
that phone's going to be ringing now.
I don't doubt it.
He won't be on the street for 5 minutes. He is a talented player. And I'm hearing there's a lot of teams who are like on the James Bradberry watch list. They're just sitting there and watching and waiting. So I think Joe Shane is trying to figure out a way to make it happen, but I don't see a way around it. I really don't.
I mean, unless they tack on extra voidable years, but then they got to carry that contract on the books for, multiple years, which I don't think he wants to do.
No, he wants to get rid of all the Dave Gettleman guys. I mean, you and I both know. You want to divorce that as soon as you possibly can and move on.
And you don't want that reminder.
That's the phase they're in. Yeah,
that's kind of like the alimony. You're paying alimony with the dead cat money.
That's right.
Trust me, I worked out these scenarios, Solomon.
Right. Yeah,
I don't see a way around it other than to just flat out cut him. Unfortunately, designate him as if you have to call him. Well, actually, it doesn't matter if you designate him a post June 1st cut because he has a voidable year next year. But there's no other way around it. And you're right. There's no trade market because teams know what the Giants' situation is, and they know that Bradberry's going to become available. So, hey, we'll just sit tight and wait until he becomes available, and we don't have to give up anything.
Absolutely.
So they're smart. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but without the calories and without the sugar. Most Built Bars contain around 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein, and they taste great. Built Bar offers 9 amazing flavors, a nut and nut-free variety, plus a rotating limited-time offering of different flavors that changes up every so many weeks. Head on over to BuiltBar.com today to see what their current flavor lineup looks like, and use their special promo code LOCKED15 to save 15% off your first order. Again, that code is LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. Let us talk now about Clene. Now, just a little background information before I have you talk about it. ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, has made the headlines lately with the NFL. You've had players such as Steve Gleason, O.J. Brigance, Tim Green, I think was recently diagnosed with the disease. And you are involved with this company, Clene. It's spelled Clene.
Yeah.
And they are working on a new treatment, I believe, that will help those who are stricken by ALS. Can you talk a little bit about that treatment? And start off, if you would, let's backtrack a little bit. What drew you to this? And then tell us a little bit about the treatment and the advancements that Clene is making.
Well, I've been very fortunate to be blessed with really good health, to be able to play in the National Football League for 7 seasons, to be able to cover it for 25 years as a broadcaster. I couldn't do that if I didn't have the brain, if I didn't have my faculties, if I didn't have my health. And so I'm keenly aware that, like a Steve Gleason with the New Orleans Saints, or an O.J. Brigance with the Baltimore Ravens, or Tim Green, who was a former broadcaster himself and could no longer call games. He's a phenomenal author, a great writer of novels, and lost his ability to do the things that he loves to do because of the disease that we know as ALS. And so it's just really one of those things where I've watched so many young people lose their health to this disease. And then after reading and learning about the reports that NFL players are 4 times more likely to get the disease of ALS and die from it. And so I partnered with Clene Nanomedicine and their CEO, Rob Etherington, to help get the message out about their new drug that's in a late phase clinical trial that hopefully will be coming on the market soon. But really more importantly is to bring greater awareness to the fact that there is a need for these new innovative treatments. We haven't had any drugs. It's been a long time since we've had any drugs or any new treatments come to the forefront to be made available for ALS patients. And so we want to shine a bigger light on that and help people to understand that there is a need, and there are companies and executives and researchers really working very hard, like companies at Clene Nanomedicine, to bring those new innovative treatments to the market.
Now, I apologize because I didn't finish my medical degree, but dementia and Alzheimer's, that's not related to ALS, is it? Or is it kind of?
Well, those are what we call neurodegenerative diseases. So in that sense, they're in the same family of what we call tauopathies. And so, but no, this treatment, what we're talking about, is specifically for ALS.
Gotcha. Okay. I asked because I lost both my parents to dementia, and I know there's been advancements to be made there, but I had just wondered if maybe this covered it as well. So, for those not familiar with ALS, can you just describe, what it does, how it affects the person? You mentioned it affects the brain. I imagine it affects the motor skills as well at some point. I mean, can you just kind of
Rob Etherington and our CEO at Clene Nanomedicine does a really good job of describing kind of what ALS is. And just in layman's terms, is when the cells in our brain lose the energy. Think about maybe your 90-year-old grandmother, and maybe she moves a little slower and talks a little slower. But she wasn't always that way. Like in her 20s and 30s, she was much like you and I having a conversation right now. And as we get older, our brain cells, they tend to lose energy. Think about ALS as a disease that robs those cells of energy way before their time. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so now you have someone, just the ability to move, the ability to talk, the ability to breathe. You're robbed of those those motor skills in the brain. And so to have those cells lose energy, you're going to see someone slow down in terms of the processing, their ability to speak and talk and move in ways that can be just very heartbreaking and very tragic when you're young and you lose your vitality in the middle of your life.
Is ALS related to CTE, which I know has been in the news a lot, especially with pro football players?
I think there are studies out there that show some correlation, but really CTE, just like you mentioned with dementia and Parkinson's, it's in the family of tauopathies. It is considered a neurodegenerative disease, but yet and still there's so much study that needs to be done on CTE that there is no strong correlation between CTE and ALS, other than the fact that it's listed as a tauopathy, and it's known to be also a neurodegenerative disease.
And, in case we have listeners out there who have family members going through this, what sounds like a really devastating disease, is there any way that they can participate in some of the studies that Clene is doing and get involved, donating maybe to ALS causes and stuff like that?
Well, right now, they're in the final phase of the clinical trial for their new treatments. But you can go to the website just to find out more information about what Clene is doing to bring about these new innovative treatments and how they're expected to come to market, and follow what Clene is doing. Learn of their story and what they're doing in terms of trying to find a cure or treatments for this disease. Treatments is probably the best way to define what they're working on. And Clene is an example of how executives and researchers are really focusing on developing much needed new treatments to fight ALS disease. So you can go to the website at clene.com. That's CLENE.com to find out more.
And of course, we'll have that website in our show notes in case anybody, didn't write that down or anything like that. But, watching a loved one, just suffer like that, especially with a disease for which there's no known cure or any way to kind of stop it from progressing. This sounds like it provides some hope for people who are stricken by ALS.
Absolutely. And that's why you want to go to the Clene website, because I think if you read about what Clene Nanomedicine and Rob Etherington and the people there are doing, I think it will provide you some hope. I think it will provide you some answers to some very serious questions if you know someone who's battling ALS disease. I think you'll come away feeling a lot better knowing that there's some very smart and talented people who are working on solutions to the problem.
Well, that's good to know, because, there are so many incurable diseases out there, and to know that progress is being made on one that just totally affects the most important part of the body, which is
the brain. Absolutely.
The brain, exactly.
Absolutely.
And what would we be without our brains, right?
Oh my goodness, right? I don't even want to think about it.
I don't either. And again, as somebody who lost two parents to dementia, and I'm getting up in age, believe it or not. I sit there and I say, my God, what would I be like without my brain? Because I do a lot of writing in addition to podcasting and everything like that. So I have to do a lot of research. And if I couldn't do that, I might as well just, call it a life, So.
And Patricia, you and I both know, because I host podcasts and radio shows and done television for 25 years, the amount of research that we have to do, right? Amount of reading and note taking, and then the building of and creation of content, right? The writing that takes place and the storytelling that you need to have, and to be able to do that extemporaneously. Hey, listen, as we get older, you have to stop down. Maybe you get a little slower, but to be able, if you're losing that cognitive ability, it could be heartbreaking. There is no doubt about it. It could be very heartbreaking, because we sometimes take our health for granted. But when we lose it prematurely, it really does hit home. And that's why the people at the Clene Nanomedicine are working so very hard to try to find a solution to help people have more hope and understand that there's someone out there who's fighting and working on your behalf.
Well, that's wonderful. And again, folks, that website is www.clene.com. That's spelled CLENE. Check them out. Get the facts, get some information, learn about this disease, learn about what the folks at Clene Nanomedicine are doing. Really good stuff. Solomon, I can't thank you enough for your time, for coming on to talk about this, to talk Giants football, to talk the draft. This was just an absolute treat for me, because I've long been an admirer of you, and I hope to have the opportunity to speak to you again at some point.
Well, and Patricia, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you. I know I don't just speak for myself, but for all the people at Clene Nanomedicine, thank you for the opportunity to share this important information with your listeners and your viewers. Thanks for having me again.
My pleasure. Giant fans, thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed today's show. As always, we'll be back again tomorrow with an all-new episode of the LockedOn Giants podcast. Until then, everybody, have a fantastic day.